we discussed something called serverless. So basically, technically, there are servers behind the scene, but Microsoft prefers to call few services as serverless. Why they are calling it as serverless? I'll explain that. Now, the first thing in your serverless is your serverless functions or Azure functions, or there are different terminologies. Basically, I would prefer to call it as Azure function. So what it is like before getting into that and understanding what it is, let's go back to our project and see the scenario. So if we have a requirement, and then it will be easy to address that and understand what exactly is happening. So this is the same project where we left off. So in our post method, remember we were doing few things here. So this first step, we were passing data to SQL Server. Then in the same function, I was also writing a message to the queue. Then after that, in the same function, we were writing, okay, we removed it, but we were writing code to Azure storage table. It's not a good design principle. If you see, this is one API call on this controller, and which is performing, overall it is performing one task, but there are multiple subtasks within that. Like one is adding data to a SQL DB or Cosmos DB, whatever we decide. That is one thing. Next, at the same time, we are adding a message into the queue for our back office application for order processing unit. Then at the same time, we are also adding a row into the table entity of our storage type. So if you look at this, like this one function is performing three subtasks or three tasks. So this is not a good design. Like remember, the reason why we are doing APIs is you want to keep, you want to decouple your application, you want to decouple your services, and your one API call should perform one task. This is one problem. Okay, second problem, if you see performance wise, I am an end user, I am submitting my order, I am filling my credit card details, I am giving my shipping address, then I am clicking on checkout. So as an end user, I have to wait for little more time because internally your application is doing these three tasks. Okay. So performance wise, design wise also it's not good. Performance wise also it is giving a delay to my end user. As an end user, I have to wait because your application is linear. Like it will go even if you call async await, and at the end your processor is doing one task at a time. So overall, my application is also held up. Performance is low, design is not good, and the third is your application is also holding up the, so like it is only doing one task on the time. There's a load on your application because they are doing one call or one API is doing multiple tasks there. So there's a more load on the web server, there is more load on the memory of your web server, CPU time of your web server. There are multiple things happening there. Okay. So understand what is the problem here with this design. How do we address this? We'll see a solution, but before seeing a solution, if you understand what is the problem, then solution will make a sense. Do you see what is the problem with this code, what we have written here? Basically, this is not a good design, and it is making my end user wait for longer, and there is more load onto the web server to perform multiple things at one time. So what I can do is, like, if this is my web server and within my API call, that post order call, I can do one task here. Maybe I can decide whatever I want to keep here. So if I look at this, my primary task is to add data to the database. Like it might be SQL database or it might be Cosmos DB, anything. So this is my primary task, adding data to the database. Now what I can do is, remember this database server is a resource on your Azure. In your Azure portal or platform, there are so many resources. SQL Server is one resource, like that storage is one resource, app service where we have host our web application is a resource. And what are the other resources we have there? Queues are resource, table is a resource, and the list is on and on. We have seen there are more than 200 plus products available right now with the Azure. Internally, Azure keep tracks of all these things, what is happening. For now, just call it as logs. So adding a row to the database table is also, in other words, I can say there is something happening on the SQL server, which Azure portal keep tracks of it. This Azure portal keep tracks of whatever is happening on all your resources into something called logs. This is not the correct terminology, but for now, just keep in mind that just to make it simple, we are calling it logs. In our maybe this week or next week we will discuss what it is actually. But just understand that it is keeping an eye on all these resources. So anything happens in this, we can take some actions. We can have actions, triggers based on different operations on these resources. So I have Azure portal, and under that Azure portal I have different resources, and Azure is keeping an eye on all these resources, like what is happening in SQL Server, what is happening in storage, what is happening in app service, queue, tables, and all this. So in our scenario, okay, this was the background. Our scenario is, like, in my post order method, there are three things happening. I'm adding a row to the database. I'm adding this. This we already discussed. Let's come back here. So solution is, like, what we do, we create our web application, or in my post order, I will add an data to the database. This is one task I have to do. Another is I have to add a row to the queue. Then another task is I have to add a data to the table. What I can do is, whenever a record is added into this table, what the service will do is, this service will take this record and add it to the queue, and like this there will be another service which will be tracking your database server. It can be tracking your database server, or it can also be tracking your queue. For example, we'll just say that it is tracking your database server, and whenever there's a row added, this service is tracking your database, and whenever there is a change in your database, it's adding a row into the queue. Same way, there's another service 2, which is still keeping an eye on the database, and whenever there is a change, this service is adding a data into the table. You understood what we are designing here? Or any questions in this, whatever I have discussed? My main web API controller, that post method, is only performing one task. So it's a good design principle. It's not making my end user to wait to perform these additional operations and it is not running in my web application. This task, adding data to the queue, adding data to the table, it is not running in my main web application. It is not running in the web application pool. It is not utilizing the web application resources in the sense like CPU time or memory usage or network traffic. Nothing is being utilized by your these additional services. These additional services are running in their own app pool. It is running in their own instances. The only thing, and the good design principle, a good thing about this services is they do only one task and they keep tracking only one service. These services called Azure functions. These are serverless. Why do we call serverless? We'll discuss in a bit right now. But before going there, I just want to make sure you people understood what is the solution we came up with. Okay, the services are Azure functions. So I'll create one Azure function to keep an eye on database, and whenever there is a change, I'll add. Okay, George is asking, does it have to happen sequential or parallel? Okay, we'll discuss that. That's a good question. Like, it depends on scenario, and this is little, we'll discuss it. Okay, So you understood what is this, everybody?
Yeah, yes.
But if there is a requirement where you have to make it sequential or when you have to run parallelly, that we'll see in a next topic. But
Oh,
for this, so for me as a developer of this post order, I'm not concerned whether this is running first or that is running first. I'm only concerned as long as there is a record in a queue, there is a record in a table. Okay. Right now, that is not a requirement. It has to run parallelly or it has to run sequentially. That is not my requirement at all. Maybe later I'll have a requirement. There might be a scenario that once my order is submitted, it has to be, it has to send to a queue where a different department take care of, packing that order. After packing, only then they can initiate a shipping order. So this has like the business requirement is like packing step has to be completed before I initiate shipping step. So there I have to think about it. But for now we are taking a simple scenario to begin with. We'll get into that more complex scenarios later. So
okay.
clear, right? So Azure is keeping a track of. So who is informing this Azure function that there is a record in the DB? Azure function with the help Azure function is keeping a track of few logs. So while creating this Azure function, we'll tell what to keep a track of, and whenever there's a change onto DB, so like this we can create Azure functions for SQL or for storage or for app servers or for queues or tables like this. So there are different things. So this is pretty theory and basics. So I just want you people to understand why do we need Azure functions. I can just simply show you the code, how to create, how to deploy, how to use, but before that I just want to make sure that you people feel the need for that Azure functions. Why do we need it? Then you can think about your real-time scenarios and you can just start implementing that in your current applications or in your future applications. So where do we need to put these functions or when do we need to use this? Okay,
Right.
clear?
Yeah. So the user is not like user is not blocked because we worry only about posting the order record to the table.
Exactly. And our controller API is performing one task. We are just submitting data to Cosmos DB or to SQL DB. But there can be there might be another no, example. Let me take this here, right? Let me just save it.
Yeah. Yeah.
01. No, I'll take a new file here. Within the same e-commerce application, assume that this is backend admin application where admin is creating products or creating categories. So what happens is when an admin creates a product, he need to upload one image. So if you go to any Amazon or Flipkart here, so Flipkart is e-commerce, quite popular e-commerce site in India. Amazon is global, everybody knows it. So we'll just take this as an example. So for example, this is one product. Okay, I'll just take any one of this example. See, same image, the size is different here, the size is different here, and when you click on this, it is the different size here, right? 1, 2, 3, and if you go back on this category listing page, the size is different. Right? So for one single image, there are 4 different dimensions of that image, right? Usually this is what happens with your e-commerce site. Like when the user is uploading a product image, do you think that the backend operator or whoever is uploading that images, is he uploading different dimension of images there? No, he'll only upload one image now. So where do you think he's going to upload that image? With our Azure knowledge, he might be uploading into storage blocks, right? Okay. Now our scenario is like I'm just giving, it might be a product controller, right? And under product controller it might be post method. So in this post method, how many things is doing? One thing, adding row to table. Another thing, adding image to storage. Now what this function has to do? It has to create multiple. So in this scenario, you like, what do you think we can do using Azure function, or how Azure function is going to help in now? Anybody wants to try? I'll create an Azure function. Okay, what this service is going to do? It will keep a track on Azure storage. Whenever there's a new image added onto this, what this function will do, it will read that image, and this service will create multiple images of the multiple sizes of the same image. That way, my main web application, which is responsible for adding the data into the table, is free now. I mean, free in the sense it is less overhead. There is a performance improvement there, and as an administrator or as a backend officer, I don't have to worry about creating multiple images of or multiple size of same image there. Clear? Okay. Anybody, any questions still here? So why do we need, or how we can use Azure? We can offload the work of our main application, which can be taken care by backend services, which doesn't need an UI, that we can move to Azure functions. So as I told in the first image here, Azure keep tracks of everything, whatever is happening into logs, and we can have Azure function, tracking almost everything what we need as a web developer. Okay, so enough talking. Let's see how we can create that. So when we actually see, it will be more clear. I hope like whatever we discuss is makes sense, right? Okay, I'm going here to our same application. Okay, I'll just close this one now. I'll add a new project here into my solution. Add new project. I have it in my recent projects, but if you don't, you might not be having it. You should be seeing something called Azure functions here. If you don't see, you can search it here also. Okay, it's right here. I don't know why it is still searching, but if it is not there on your system, it may not be there. So what you have to do is it will give an option here to install it from here. You can install it if it is not available. Install more tools and features. You'll see not finding, you can install it. Or when you initially install your Visual Studio 19 or 17, whatever the version you're using, that installation window, right? The first option it gives, like you choose what are the tools you want. There will be a tool called Azure Cloud Data Load. So if you just select that, it will install all these things. But either this one should work if you want to install Azure functions. So anyways, you guys should know how to install that. So we are interested in Azure function project. Okay. Next, I want to call this as Git tracker. Why I'm calling it as Git tracker, I'll just tell you now. Basically, there are different types of functions I can create. One is empty, where I can write all the code by myself. And there are a few other types of functions. Other types in the sense, other types of triggers. As we have seen in this, there are different services, resources on your Azure portal. For the same thing, you can have a different triggers happening. Basically, I can create an Azure function that get triggers automatically. Another thing about this triggers are nobody is calling them. That's why we are calling as serverless. If this is happening automatically based on an event, this is getting triggered. That is one reason we are calling it as serverless. It is getting initiated and it is getting executed automatically based on an action on any one of these resources. Right now, these are the resources supported by your Azure function. Okay, there can be a Azure function triggered based on a blob. So whenever a blob is added to a specified container, so if I want to create this one, so I have to specify the connection string here. Connection string, remember, right? For your storage account, you get the keys, the secret keys. So basically, I have to point out which storage account on which container, that folder, if the new item is added, this function will execute automatically. Same thing, I can have a trigger for Cosmos DB. This is little more. Remember, we were talking about this sequential and parallel. There we'll see this one. events and all, we have not discussed this. IoT will, once we see event grid and event hub, then it will make more sense. But we can have triggers on event grids and event hubs also. What is event grid and all, we'll see in later classes. And we can have a Azure function triggered automatically based on a queue. Whenever there is a message as added to a queue, we can have this trigger like that. We can have a trigger for timer also. Like there might be a possibility, like some web applications or web hosting servers. There's a scheduler. In Windows, we have task schedulers like Linux and other flavors. You have the cron jobs and all, which runs automatically for that certain number of intervals for certain number of days. Like so, that kind of we can have a function executes automatically on specified number of times on those intervals on those. So we can have a timer trigger. We can have a queue trigger. We'll begin with the basic HTTP trigger. HTTP trigger is calling a post method as a HTTP trigger. Okay, and this is more simple and more easy to understand. So we'll begin with an HTTP trigger. So I'll say authentication level here, function. Anonymous means anybody with the URL can call this function. We don't want to keep it anonymous. And admin also, it's more secure. Like you have to pass username and password and security key and all those things. But by default, in most of the scenarios, functions will be more than enough for us. Emulator, I'll just keep it none for because it doesn't require anything here. So we are starting with HTTP triggers. We'll eventually see all different types of triggers as well. Okay, so this is the name of your function, git tracker, and this is the standard code. I have not written anything here. It is going to run this function. The authorization level is functional, and there are two operations. I mean, I can have a get method. I can invoke this function on a get, or I can invoke it on post. So route is by default the route would be then whatever the domain gives /API. Remember, whenever we post an app service on this will be git tracker dot Azure websites.net and /API/ name of the function. Okay, for us the name of the function and name of the class are similar, so it might be like this, but we can have different also. So this is your default URL. For some reason, if you want to give some different routing, same like MVC or web API, you can mention the route here. So I don't want to change that right now. And this is the HTTP request. If the end user is invoking this HTTP request on post method, so whatever the data they pass, that comes into the HTTP request, the query string or the body that get passed to this HTTP request, we can send this. Then iLogger, we know this iLogger, like this is standard C# namespace which we use to track logs for debugging or tracing features. First thing we are saying is logging this information. So I'll just change this to. It is looking for the query parameter called name. If that is available, storing into the string. And here it is reading if it's a post method, it is reading for a body, storing into this, then deserializing that into a dynamic object. And if the name is empty, basically that means if the queries, there is no parameter in the query string, it's trying to read it from the body. If it's a post method, it will read it from the body. Then it's just reformatting that message and sending it back here. So let us just run this as it is. Good thing about Visual Studio is like you can run it locally here. And another thing is like even though you have given authorization level as function, because it knows that it is running in development environment, it will not ask for any authorization key or a username or password for us. When there is a B2B communication, B2B in the sense business to business communication, this HTTP triggers are useful. This is up and running, and it is running on this portal, this URL. I'll copy this and Let's just call it here. It's an HTTP replacement. There's no name passed. If I look at logs, I should see something here. Yeah, my Azure function has started, and this is executed successfully and succeed. No issues here. If I just pass query string here. Hello. So whatever you're passing, you're just displaying it here. And again, we saw there's a log here, and it was succeeded. Okay. Any questions in this? I mean, we have not written anything in this. It is just whatever they have given. Eventually, what we will do is we'll get rid of all these things, and we'll have your code here, whatever you want to do. If the user is calling this HTTP URL, so what you will do is right now, whatever we are logging here is it's just temporary logging. We are just logging into console. So if you just close that, we'll lose it. But you can configure your log analytics. There's a resource on your Azure.
Yeah.
Right now, whatever we're logging is temporary logs. Once you end the session, we'll lose all these logs. We are not writing. There are options. You can write to SQL Server. You can write to storage account. You can write to flat files and store it in your storage accounts there.
Yeah. Because in web API, so we use nlog normal, no, ASP.NET web API.
There are different tools, right? Like nlog or Serilog, like this, all third-party applications. So you decide whatever you want to do. But the built-in, if you are using Azure, we'll see. I mean, if you are using Azure, you don't have to use third-party logs. Like Azure itself has a very good logging application or logging resource. We'll see that. So beside that, any other questions in this? Whatever we have seen. Let's publish this one. Then we'll see one real-time scenario here. So I want to publish on a Windows environment itself. We can do that in Linux also, or app container or Dockers. Like this is for Dockers and all. They are more advanced. We'll see that later. Azure function Windows is good for us. Function app. This is not app service. Internally it is app service, but Azure prefer to call it as app function. The reason why it is calling app function or serverless is, one is it is getting invoked automatically. Nobody is calling it specifically. That is one thing. Another thing is, for your app services, we have seen even if the users are not using it, there are optimal charges still charged for it. As long as my website is up, my website is my account is still built, or it is still charged for me. But whereas it's Azure function, we only get charged for the execution time. If this execution takes 2 seconds, I'll only be get charged for 2 seconds. Even though I'm hosting it for all the time, it might be hosted for next 5 years, but I will only be charged for the execution time. So how many times my end users are going to call that Azure function and how much time it is going to take. So we'll just select this, finish. It is also enabling that application insights. This application insight is a service from your Azure portal that keep tracks of the performance of your application, keep tracks of logs, errors, all those things. Okay, we have started publishing it. While it is publishing, let's go to this Azure price calculator. If you don't see, you can search it from here. So I will just want to select Azure functions. View that. So I choose the region. I choose the consumption. I mean the tier consumptions and premium. Consumption is like you pay only for the execution time, and memory size depending on your requirement. You choose your memory size. 512 should be more than enough. And execution, like that your Azure function, this particular Azure function what we are writing, how much time it will take to execute in milliseconds. For example, I am saying that my function might take on an average 100 milliseconds to execute that. How many times I'm going to execute this per month? Let's say based on your last 6 months sales data, you know that per month how many sales order you're getting. So on an average, I might be getting 10,000 sales order per month. I'm just giving an example. It might be more or less. This is 10,000. So execution count is how much I have to pay? 0. Why? Because if you read this one, the first 40,000 GB per second of execution, and this is 10 lakhs, 10 lakhs or 1 million of executions are free. Your Azure function is called so many times, you are still not paying anything. So if let me add one more 0. So even if we cross whatever they are giving for free, so I'm calling 10 million times per month, I still end up paying $3 per month for my one Azure function. So cost wise is very, very cheap. Why? That is why they are calling it as serverless, because it is not, it is hosted, and they are not billing us for all the hosting time. They are only billing us for the execution time. So the execution of that function might last for 100 milliseconds to maximum 10 seconds. 10 seconds of execution of one function, it's not a good function, but I'm just giving an example. So at the end, you're just paying for Azure function is taking time to execute. So looking at this cost wise, it is very, very less. So I can have n number of functions. I can just think about all the overall my application, and I can just offload my main application requirements into Azure function, and that way, that is one way I can improve the performance of my main application. Okay, George was asking how to calculate memory requirement. We'll see that here. Right? Yeah, this is succeeded. This is succeeded. Okay, I'll go to this Azure, and I'll go. This is my resource group. And under the resource group, we publish this called Git tracker. Like this is same for all the resources. By default, you land on the overview page. So George, you can see like it is keeping a track of your metrics. So you see how much memory and how many execution time it is taking. So based on this data, MB, like how much data it is transferring back and forth. So based on this, you can take a decision and go. Makes sense. Okay, good. Clear? Remember that to call this here, if you look at the code, we said like there is an authorization level on function level. So to call this and execute, this is the URL. What did we say? The URL will be something like this: /API/Git tracker. So if I just take this and try to call it here, let's see what happens. 401 is unauthorized. So that means this API is still there. In other words, we can say that this is world's smallest API with one class, one function. So this Azure function, we know it's Azure function, but browser, like for them, it is still a class, function, a controller, and API. So it is there, but there is no authentication provided right now. So how do I get that? I go here, I go to functions. You have to click on get URL function. So you want the function key. That's what we told, right? This is for more advanced and master key and all. You will not share this with your, remember, like HttpTrigger is for business to business communication. You want to share this key with your business partner. I'll just copy this URL. Okay. And before we call that, I'm going to monitor. Let us configure this monitor so that we see the logs whenever this is getting executed. So where do I want to store this? I think it's created. Just read this. Results may be delayed up to 5 minutes. So if your end users are calling, the logs might not be available immediately. Sometimes it takes up to 5 minutes. not more than 5 minutes. So, onto this, I'll go to and you can see last 30 days track, how many times they were able to call it successfully and how many times there were some errors. You go to log, I copied that, just pasted here. I should say connected, then we'll call it so that we see the logs here. This secret key as a code into the parameter, that's it. Remember, there's no UI on this, so there's no way they can pass username and password. So this is kind of token which your Azure platform has generated. So anybody with this token will be able to call this function. So you may not want to share this with everybody, but only with the trusted or agreed partners you will share this with.
Does the function key change or is it static?
We can regenerate that if we need. Okay, let's call it now and go back here. We should see the track. We saw the same thing here, whatever we are logging there, and it was succeeded. Okay. This function was called programmatically, and this is executed successfully. Right. So if I pass another parameter here, method also, remember it was accepting method post, and I just want to pass anything because there's nothing specific. Whatever we pass, it will take. We got another record here because this time we called it as from our postman method. We called post method here. Any questions till here? Basically, we have seen what is HttpTrigger and how do we publish that on your Azure and how do we enable the monitor just to keep a track. And if I go to invocations, I should see how many times it was called, how many times it was. So remember, we are still not able to see the result here because sometimes it takes up to 5 minutes to refresh. Then how do we get the keys? You go to the overview page and you get function key from here. And yeah, those are the things. And we have discussed this and this. Makes sense? Yes. If you are running locally, we can hit a breakpoint from Postman. Yeah. But if you're calling this URL, if you look at, just forget about web APIs or just forget about Azure function and Azure. What is this? This is a class. This is a function. And this is your C# code. That's it. So that can be debugged. This is the local URL. I can call it in Git. I can call it as get or post. Let me call it as a get. And for local, you don't need the security keys and all. So debug should also work for us, not an issue. Any more questions? Have you heard about webhooks? Anybody heard about webhooks? Okay, normally webhooks are like a, we will see what are webhooks. I'll give a scenario, that way it will be more clear. Okay, this is our e-commerce application, and we know that if somebody orders something on our website, we have to ship them. We have to deliver it at their home. So just I'm giving an example. We tied up with one shipping company called DHL or FedEx. Just think about, there are so many things happening here. You are submitting your shipping order and address and everything, all these things happen. So what user can do is, when he logs into his e-commerce application, he can keep a track of what is happening with his order. Like it is in shipped stage, or it is in packing stage, it is in transit, it has reached that point, all those things. That information he can still see that here, right? And at the end, when FedEx delivers this or DHL delivers this to the end user, I think that this is an end user. When he delivers this end user, what FedEx should do is, now FedEx should tell us that it has completed that. How they tell us? We cannot ask them to log into our application, right? You understand this scenario? Customer is submitting an order on our application. What we are doing, we are taking his order information, we are packing all his orders, and then we are informing FedEx or DHL to pick that order from our warehouse or something, or somebody from our office is dropping it at pickup point or a drop point of FedEx. Then FedEx is doing his additional packing. Then they are dropping it and delivering it to the customer. Once this delivery is completed, the order was successfully completed, this FedEx or this shipping company has to inform us, right? So how they can inform us? So suppose like I'm your client and I'm giving you this requirement, how would you deal that with your current e-commerce application? Yeah, anybody wants to try? Give a try. I can create an HTTP Azure function, HttpTrigger function like this. Okay, I can call this as, I'm just giving an example, delivered, order delivered, and the URL might be something like this, order delivered. I'll generate one secret key and I'll give it to FedEx. Okay, I'll tell FedEx that, hey, why you take this order, you do whatever you want to do with this, and once you are done, why don't you just call this URL? Once they call this URL, internally I can handle, because internally here I have access to my database, my resources and everything. I can have this order status updated on my end. Understood? So that's the reason I told it is B2B application. Okay, you understood the scenario? What we can do? You understood the problem? Like we are submitting our order to shipping company. It can be DHL, FedEx or anything. So once they delivered it, they have to update us back that they did their job. So how would they update that? That was the problem. The solution is I'll create an HttpTrigger or HttpTrigger Azure function, and I'll share the URL with them to call us back. How they will call it? So if we think about real-time scenarios, suppose you are working for FedEx, okay? Everybody on same page, right? So whatever I told till now, if you understand this, you'll understand my next point. If not clear, don't hesitate. Just ask me. I'll explain it again. Because next point will make sense only if you understand whatever I told you till now. Okay, just think that you are working for a FedEx. I cannot change my code, right, to call your API. Like this, you are not the only one e-commerce application. Like this, there are n number of e-commerce applications out in the market, and there are millions of applications out in the market, right? So I cannot keep on changing my code just for your application. Makes sense, right?
So can you repeat the last explanation again?
Okay. Before that, you understood you are an e-commerce application. I mean, you are developing an application for e-commerce, or your company is developing e-commerce, and you are a developer for them. So what we did, we created an HttpTrigger, and we shared that HttpTrigger with FedEx. They'll call this fine, right? Any issues till now? No issues, right?
No.
Everybody on the same page. Okay, no issues. Good. Just forget that. Okay. Now think that you are a developer of FedEx. Okay. You are working for FedEx. Okay. You are creating a web application for FedEx. Okay.
Okay.
Just think that there are n number of e-commerce applications in the market, and FedEx might be taking orders from all those e-commerce application vendors to deliver their orders to end customers, right?
Yeah.
So just imagine, as the developer of FedEx, you cannot keep on changing your code, right? Everybody might be giving their own APIs.
Yeah.
Right? So how long I can, I cannot, I mean, that's not a practical approach. So what I would do is, I would create, I'm just giving a rough example. I mean, real-time implementation might be something different. Just to get an overview, what I would do is, I will create a table, and here I'll store this API, and I'll create a screen. I'll give this screen to this e-commerce people. Hey, you want my services? For delivering your application? You have to sign up with them. So that was already there. Like these people also should have signed up with them. They should have a merchant account on them. They'll give a secret key or password to submit orders to their web application. At the same time, they tell that, okay, once I am done with your processing, what should I do? It has to be a GET request from the e-commerce application. Yeah, this is also possible. I mean, what George is suggesting, like it has to be a GET request. But when should I call GET? I don't know, right? Whether they have delivered today, tomorrow, or day after tomorrow. I have to keep calling that GET request, again and again, or some scheduler. So are you done? Are you done? Are you done? Like that, I have to, go back to them multiple times. That's a good solution, but the problem is I might have to call them multiple times. That is another problem. So I'm just thinking to make it more simple. Just forget about e-commerce application. Now we are FedEx developers. So how do we solve that FedEx problem? As a FedEx developer, this is my problem. Like I cannot lose my business. I have to accommodate this kind of request which is coming. So what I would do is, instead of hard coding that API into my code, I would create a table. Okay, calling let's say callback API table. I'm just giving a random name here. I'll say vendor 1. Their callback API is something like this, what we have just called. Vendor 2, their URL might be some URL, something like this. Vendor 3, their URL might be HTTPS, some random something. So now my code, I'm not hard coding the URL into my code, into my FedEx code. What I did, I just made that URL dynamic. So depending on the vendor, depending on which vendor is submitting the order, I'll go back to my table internally, because this is my table. Internally, I can identify that shipping request came from which vendor, because they have to pass their merchant ID, they have to pass that merchant key before submitting a shipping order there. So with that key and order, I can identify which vendor is submitting the shipping order. So based on the shipping order, I'll call this callback. Is this a good approach? Instead of hard coding that URL, I'm going to keep that URL in a dynamic table. So now what I will do is I'll create a screen and I'll give this screen to these people. So anyhow, they will have an account on this FedEx merchant account I sold, right? Within that, they will submit their callback URLs. Whoever is signing up with FedEx, they give their warehouse address. Like this is where you have to pick the orders from, and they'll give some other information, billing information, shipping information. Then at the same time, they'll also tell them that, hey, once you're done with that, you just call our API, and that from this screen, this FedEx people, what they will do is FedEx developer, they'll store it into this callback API table. Understood, or any questions? The problem of hard coding the URL, making changes into the code is solved, because we have suggested, or FedEx is what they are doing is they are maintaining a table, a screen and a table, and asking e-commerce vendors to give their URLs into that screen, and from that screen they are storing into a table. Vendors will update it, right? Yeah, Roshan, I'm on. George.
Yeah, so after that, FedEx will fetch that vendor URL and do the updation accordingly.
Exactly. This is
Right.
called webhooks, which is interacting, which is expecting business to business communication. They are having this concept called webhooks. Everybody know GitHub? Okay. Everybody have idea of GitHub?
Yeah.
What it is? GitHub is a source control management. So this is my GitHub account. I have few projects there. So just imagine that I'm not able to manage this project myself. I've had 2 more people to help me with this. This is my project, my private repository, private project. Like not everybody can access it. Only for the people who I provide access, they will be able to access. So if I go to settings, you see they have something called webhooks here. I can add a webhook here. What is the URL of our API? Get URL. I'll copy everything. Paste that everything here. Content type JSON is enough. Then this is it. When like GitHub is asking us, okay, you have given me this URL. When should I call this URL? I'm telling just call this whenever somebody push a code. So now I have 2 developers. I just want to know whenever they submit a code, whenever they push a code, I want to perform some operation. That operation I have written into this Azure function. So this GitHub will call that function automatically for me, or call this every time, or call this on selected events. So there are so many events available within this GitHub. When somebody branch, or somebody checks suit, or deploy the keys, all these things. Okay, most common for all these things is push event. Okay, I'll just add this. This hook is not called anytime. So when this GitHub is going to call this URL or call this Azure function, then somebody make changes into the code and commit their changes, push the changes onto this repository. Okay, I'll come back here. We go to monitor. Let's go to log. It's connected now. So let me go into the code here. Take any file. Let me take readme file. I'm just trying to make some changes into the code. I've removed some code. I'm adding some new text here, and I'm submitting these changes. So when I commit this change, what happens on the Git? A push event happens on this Git. And in webhooks, what we configured, whenever there's a push event, call this Azure function. That's what we are saying. So GitHub is not part of our application. It is something. So GitHub is one business. My e-commerce application is one business. So we are able to communicate between two businesses using Azure HTTP function. So I'm just submitting the code here. So if I go back now, sometimes no, it happens immediately. Sometimes they'll also have their internal queues. So it might take up to, depending on their availability and all. So this function was called from GitHub. So if I go to settings now and check that webhook, go to webhook, I should see a tick here saying that this was successfully, the last call was successful. If I click on this, it should show me the history, how many times it was called. Anybody any questions? What we did?
Now let's say we have multiple functions being triggered, right? Now we have configured like that, multiple functions being triggered. So do we have the control? Can we control how those functions are executed?
How, in the sense, which executes first and which executes next?
Yeah,
that we'll see. Yeah, we have. I told, right, the orchestra functions. We will see that. Sequential and parallel, all those things we can see. We can control them.
Right.
So here I can add multiple things, right? If I had to go to webhooks, I can add another webhook here if I have multiple questions. But how do we order that? We'll see again later. But for today, if you just understand this one, this is more than enough for me. So we have seen how we can call our function from GitHub. Okay. We know PayPal, right? It's a payment gateway. Everybody knows PayPal? Yeah. Okay. Right. Even in US, people know PayPal. Fine. Okay. So it might be possible that my e-commerce application is accepting payments through PayPal. Like one of the options is PayPal. So what I can do, like I can say that whenever they give the credit card details, if the credit card validation is through, or if the credit card payment is successful, just call us back and let us know that the payment is successful. Then we'll start processing the order. Okay. So we don't have to wait our customer on the front end. For sometimes it might take 2-3 seconds or few minutes also. We don't have to make our customer wait to have that credit card authorization or verification done before giving him the confirmation. We can just give him a confirmation that your order is submitted, and when the payment is processed, we'll ship your order, something like that. We can use this webhook, whatever the webhook we have created, and we can integrate it into. So I just logged into the developer account of PayPal. So this is a testing account which they'll provide us for developers. So under this, once you log in, this is your dashboard. If you scroll down on the left side, I can add webhook events here. Okay. If I go to webhook events, same thing, very similar to what we have seen on GitHub right now. I can do that. And very good thing about this PayPal is they have given mock-up simulators for testing purpose. So with this, I don't even have to wait until a real-time purchase happens, then our API get calls. So I can just use this for testing. I'll copy that URL again, same URL. Okay, when they should call this? There are so many events here. Okay, so I'll say checkout order approved or checkout order completed approved. So after taking the credit card no details and all, they'll verify it. Once it is approved, I'm saying that you call this API. I don't have to make my user wait, or my application doesn't have to wait until I get a response back from them. So let me go back here. I'll just clear this log so that we see the fresh log here. We got test. Read this. Your event has been successfully queued. Even they are using queues. It might be Azure or something else, but so the execution order is not added to the queue, so it might be execute. Okay, now it has executed. This is the data they are sending. PayPal is sending this data. Address one. So this is all dummy data, but in real-time scenario, you will not be submitting it from here, right? You will be submitting a checkout order from your program. So based on that, they'll be sending us back the reference ID or the customer email address or something like this. So remember, this is the post method, so that all those things get converted into JSON and cuts this complete thing, whatever you see, come back to as a body. And you can just convert that into a dynamic data that we are already doing it. And you can access those properties, data dot something, data dot, in this scenario, email address. With the email address or the custom properties, what they're sending us, you can track which order it is, which email address for it is. So today we have just seen one type of HttpTrigger. I've tried to explain you why do we need Azure functions, and I've tried to give you some real-time scenarios where we might need to use this HTTP triggers. Basically, it is between business to business communication, and we have seen webhooks. Like this is what I mean. You can create webhooks for your application. If you see that your application might be communicating with third-party application, and you might need to inform them back once you're done with their services. For example, you might be creating an application for a CPA, a chartered accountant. We call it a chartered accountant in India, or in US they call CPA or financial advisors. So your client might be submitting the census information of all their employees to you, and you process that information and you create the balance account and everything. And final sheet, you want to submit it back to their application, and you are doing all this thing through applications. So they have their own application, you are doing with your application. Once you've done everything, just imagine that finally you're creating one PDF with all the information they need to submit to the IRS, that federal government tax departments there. So you just create webhook and give them that, just give me a URL, I'll call it once I'm done with this. So you can create webhooks in your application, or you can call webhooks for other applications. Okay, so this will bring us to end of today's session. If you have any questions, whatever we have discussed, I'll take it up.